Are you currently holding the latest generation iPhone? Do you realize that its core components, the central processing chips, were designed in California, fabricated in Taiwan, assembled in Shenzhen, and then transported to you across the very sea lanes actively patrolled by the United States Navy? Over the past 4 decades, humanity has constructed a colossal economic engine, with the United States and China acting as the 2 largest cogs, meshed so intricately that a widespread belief took hold. They could never be separated. The previous generation's belief was dangerously naive, that $760 billion in annual trade would prevent a military conflict. However, history proves that economic logic rarely dictates war. The example of Britain and Germany in 1914, each other's largest trading partners before they plunged Europe into war, serves as a chilling precedent. Today, we face a greater paradox. 2 giants who mutually sustain each other are simultaneously sharpening the blades to sever that very lifeline. The analysis moves beyond trade disputes and diplomatic threats to contemplate a scenario of total war. Thus, when these 2 nuclear superpowers inevitably clash, what will be the catastrophic fallout? When the global internet is fragmented, satellites are neutralized, and the dollar status is decimated overnight, who will prevail in a conflict whose only prize is the thermal ash of the global economy? Most critically, will human civilization be thrust back into a digital stone age? It's a symphony of destruction. Assessing the belligerents before the first salvos, we must understand the primary antagonists. The established post-1945 world order is now in a state of terminal geopolitical entropy. In the blue corner stands the United States, the venerable hegemon of the maritime domain. The U.S. wields a triad of global power unmatched by any historical empire: the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, a formidable military alliance structure, NATO, a UK-US, Japan, South Korea, and core technological supremacy, semiconductors, artificial intelligence. Yet the U.S. exhibits systemic fatigue. Its public debt has surpassed the $38 trillion threshold. The society is deeply polarized, and its heavy industrial base has atrophied after decades of outsourced manufacturing. The U.S. resembles a heavyweight boxer. The strike remains lethal, but the structural foundations are beginning to falter. In the red corner is China, the ascending dragon with explicit revisionist ambitions to redefine the global rules of engagement. China is not merely the world's primary manufacturing floor. It is a monumental 21st century strategic arsenal. It commands the world's largest navy by hull count, an unparalleled inventory of intermediate-range ballistic missiles, and the industrial capacity for rapid massive human resource mobilization. Beijing operates on the strategic premise that the era of Western dominance is concluding. However, China possesses a critical fatal vulnerability: geographical containment. The first island, chain encompassing Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, and elements of South Korea, acts as a strategic maritime choke point, restricting its commercial lifeblood. Furthermore, it faces critical deficits in energy security and food self-sufficiency. The countdown: 72 hours of darkness. The pre-conflict context is one of chilling stillness. Both powers are engaged in a strategic arms race at a velocity unseen since the Cold War. The Pentagon is dispersing forces across the Pacific under a doctrine of agile deployment, while the People's Liberation Army conducts daily drills, simulating a Taiwan blockade. The global community can sense the ignition point. While many hope for zero escalation, hope is not a tenable strategic framework. A minor incident, a naval collision, a miscalculation by an inexperienced pilot hand, the existing geopolitical framework will instantly vaporize. 72 hours of darkness. Modern warfare will not commence with a televised declaration. It will begin with silence. Absolute silence. Imagine at 2 a.m. Washington time, an unprecedented, large-scale cyber offensive, a digital Pearl Harbor simultaneously crippling the U.S. East Coast power grid, air traffic control systems, and critical financial data centers in New York. Concurrently, in Beijing, the Beidou navigation satellite systems abruptly lose signal, and major seaports like Shanghai are digitally paralyzed. This will be the opening salvo. Before kinetic missiles fly, orbital satellites will be either destroyed or blinded. GPS, the positioning infrastructure relied upon by everything from rideshare applications to Tomahawk cruise missiles, will cease operational function. Within the initial 4 hours, human communication and navigation capabilities will be degraded to 1970s levels. Chaos will propagate at light speed. Global financial markets will not collapse. They will freeze. High-frequency trading algorithms will either spin out of control or be instantaneously severed. Trillions of dollars in digital assets will be vaporized in the financial ether above the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. Information blindness will force instinctual action. Fleet commanders, severed from central command, will execute decisions based purely on pre-programmed strategic rules of engagement. The moment a YJ-21 hypersonic anti-ship missile is launched from the Chinese mainland targeting a U.S. aircraft carrier, the threshold of nuclear deterrence is officially shattered. The world enters the first total war between two nuclear powers with no available off-ramp for de-escalation. The subsea cable war. This is the most devastating and least discussed vector of conflict among military planners. Public attention focuses on carriers and fighter jets, but the heart of this confrontation lies 4,000 meters beneath the ocean floor, the submarine cable sabotage. 99% of global internet data and financial transactions traverse not satellites, but delicate fiber optic cables along the seabed. In a total war scenario, both the US and China understand that victory hinges on rendering the adversary blind and dumb. Specialized submarines and unmanned underwater vehicles, UUVs, will be deployed to sever the critical data arteries linking Asia and North America. The outcome of this action would surpass the destructive scope of any tactical nuclear detonation. The global internet will fragment. Singapore, Japan, South Korea, and the entirety of Southeast Asia could be isolated from US and European servers. Platforms like Facebook, Google, and YouTube will vanish from the displays of billions of Asian users. Simultaneously, the US will activate its financial nuclear weapon. Washington will immediately freeze China's entire $3 trillion foreign exchange reserves and disconnect every Chinese financial institution from the SWIFT payment system. However, China is prepared. They will nationalize all assets belonging to US corporations within mainland China. From the Tesla Gigafactory in Shanghai to Apple stores and Starbucks outlets, hundreds of billions of dollars in Western investment will be seized as strategic hostages. The most terrifying consequence is not the destruction of capital, but the annihilation of market trust. The global supply chain will not merely be disrupted, it will be catastrophically paralyzed. Without semiconductors from Taiwan, the assembly lines for automobiles in Detroit, aircraft in Seattle, and even household appliances in Germany will cease operation. The world will not simply lack products, it will lack the capacity to manufacture products. We will witness a return to a wartime economy, marked by rationing and the severe scarcity of fundamental necessities, such as antibiotics, given that the majority of their chemical precursors originate in China. The Pacific meat grinder. With the economic and technical fronts collapsed, the military theater will become a massive meat grinder. The strategic doctrines of both sides are diametrically opposed, yet equally devastating. China will execute its anti-access area denial A2AD strategy. They will transform the sea area within a 2,000 kilometers radius of their coastline into a kill zone. Thousands of Dongfang DF-21D and DF-26 ballistic missiles will saturate the airspace, targeting U.S. carrier strike groups and forward operating bases in Guam and Okinawa. Beijing's objective is not an invasion of the U.S., but to impose a prohibitive strategic cost that deters American intervention on behalf of Taiwan or its allies. The U.S., conversely, will implement a distant strangulation strategy, rather than committing capital ships into China's heavy engagement zone. The U.S. will blockade the Strait of Malacca and the Indonesian sea lanes through which 80% of China's imported oil transits. The U.S. will effectively isolate China as an island, severing its energy and food lifelines. Concurrently, B-2 Spirit and B-21 Raider stealth bombers will execute deep penetration strikes against command and control centers, power generation plants, and missile infrastructure within the Chinese mainland. This is a profoundly bloody wager. For the first time since World War II, the U.S. Navy will face the probable loss of an aircraft carrier. These colossal vessels, carrying 5,000 personnel, could be submerged within minutes of a successful hypersonic strike. Casualties in the initial week could surpass the total combined U.S. losses from the Vietnam and Iraq wars. For China, the strategic cost is even greater. The energy strangulation will bring the economy to an absolute standstill. Major cities will suffer catastrophic power outages. The food system, already reliant on imported fertilizer and fuel, will collapse. Famine will cease to be a historical anecdote and become an existential threat at the dawn of the 21st century. The conflict will be fought not only on the seas, but also in the stomachs of 1.4 billion people. The endgame. The enemy within. The conflict's outcome will not be determined by who plants a flag on whose territory, but by which nation collapses internally first. Once the war exceeds a duration of 3 months, initial patriotic fervor will yield to mass desperation. In the U.S., the scarcity of essential goods, hyperinflation soaring to 50% to 100%, and the collapse of capital markets will trigger profound social instability. American citizens, accustomed to a life of unparalleled convenience, will reject an existence without power, internet access, and consumer products. Food and medical riots could erupt in major metropolitan areas. The U.S. government may be forced to impose martial law, suspending constitutional governance to maintain domestic order. The White House's greatest adversary will not be Beijing, but the chaos within the American heartland. In China, the pressure will be exponentially more severe. The energy blockade will shutter factories, rendering hundreds of millions of workers unemployed. The middle class, the historical pillar of social stability, will witness the instantaneous evaporation of their wealth. Decades of suppressed social contradictions will explode. The Chinese Communist Party will face its gravest existential challenge: how to effectively control 1.4 billion hungry and enraged citizens.
Ultimately,
The war may conclude not with a negotiated peace settlement, but with mutual exhaustion. Both powers will be structurally unable to sustain kinetic operations as their logistical and social frameworks have fractured. A ceasefire will be signed over the global economic wreckage. There will be no winner. Only two dying giants staring across a single ocean. The Pacific now, a vast naval graveyard. We began with the question of consequences. The answer is the definitive conclusion of the world as we have known it. The legacy of a US-China total war will be a civilizational setback of approximately 30 years in terms of economic connectivity and technical sophistication. Globalization will be extinguished, and the world will be segmented into isolated, autarkic, self-sufficient, impoverished, and mutually suspicious blocks. Smartphones, cheap international travel, and the global internet will all become luxurious relics of a lost golden age. Smaller nations like South Korea and Japan will endure the most devastating political and economic tsunamis. Compelled to align strategically or find their own path to survival in a world devoid of multilateral rules. This scenario is a cold, stark warning. In this era of hyperconnectivity, conflict between superpowers is no longer an instrument of political influence, but an instrument of collective self-immolation. The price will be paid not just in the blood of combatants, but with the future of all humanity. Will this horrific calculus of deterrence be sufficient to restrain the volatile elements in both Washington and Beijing? Or is the relentless wheel of history crushing rational thought as it hurtles toward the abyss?